Welcome to the podcast, Short Talks.
In June 2026, so recently, a Russian military drone actually struck the Cathedral of the Dormition right in the heart of Kyiv.
Right, yeah.
But if you look closely at the intelligence reports and the underlying geopolitical shockwaves of this, the justification for that strike didn't actually originate in some modern war room.
No, it didn't at all.
It traces all the way back to this broken bureaucratic promise made in the year 1686 and a sacred rule written in 451 AD.
It is, the absolute definition of a historical collision.
Yeah.
It's this moment where ancient theology just literally becomes modern artillery.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us. Today, our mission is to unpack a truly astonishing scenario, right? We're looking at how this ancient, highly complex religious framework violently collided with modern geopolitics.
Yeah, and sparked a crisis that now spans the entire globe.
Exactly. We're looking at a situation where medieval church decrees and modern state intelligence services are just locked in this massive, high-stakes clash.
And our roadmap for this today is a deeply researched article. It's titled Jurisdictions and Division: The Crisis of Institutions in the Orthodox Church and the Fenar-Moscow Conflict. And that's written by Metropolitan Konstantinos of Singapore.
Right. Now, because this text touches on what is basically the absolute third rail of modern geopolitics, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, state espionage, the Kremlin, global power struggles, we need to be very, very clear about our role today.
Absolutely.
We aren't here to take a political side, not left, not right, east or west. Our sole goal is to act as your guides.
Right. We're just here to lay it out.
Yeah. We are going to map out the author's arguments and impartially report the factual content so you can see exactly how these ancient religious mechanisms are being used on the modern battlefield.
Basically, we're dismantling the machinery of the conflict to see how the gears turn, without endorsing the operator.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how a religious dispute escalates to the point of involving the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, we actually have to start with the unique architecture of the Orthodox Church.
Yeah, because if you're coming at this with an understanding of, say, the Roman Catholic Church, you have to just throw that blueprint totally out the window.
Right.
The Roman Catholic Church operates with a single administrative center.
Right.
In the Vatican. It's a very top-down hierarchy.
Like a pyramid.
Exactly. But the Orthodox Church is fundamentally different. It is essentially a body of autocephalous churches.
Autocephalous?
Yeah, which basically just means full spiritual and administrative independence. Each of these independent churches has its own primate or leader. So they are connected not by a central earthly government, but by a common faith, shared sacred canons, and, mutual recognition.
So it's less like a massive global corporation with a CEO at headquarters dictating policy.
Right.
And much more like a loose confederation of independent states.
That's a great way to put it. And the vulnerability of a confederation is that leadership relies heavily on historical precedent and mutual trust.
Which is fragile.
Very fragile. Within this Orthodox confederation, the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, which is often referred to as the FUNAR or the EP, holds this special position. It is considered first among equals.
Okay.
It provides supreme spiritual leadership and coordinates the broader church body.
But the text is very clear that this role isn't about, hard administrative power. It's an honorary primacy.
Right.
And if you have a confederation where the leading figure relies on honor rather than an ironclad legal mandate, that creates a lot of gray area.
Oh, absolutely. And Moscow realized centuries ago that if they push hard enough, that ambiguity can fracture the whole system.
Wow.
The source actually notes that the Russian Orthodox Church has historically exploited the fuzzy legal boundaries of this first among equals concept. They use it to open up interpretive disputes, especially regarding who has jurisdiction over specific territories.
Which brings us to the fundamental question tearing this structure apart today, right? Who actually has the right to grant that ultimate independence, that autocephaly, to a local church?
Well, according to Metropolitan Konstantinos, the historical canons of the Church grant this right solely to the Ecumenical Patriarchate.
Okay, so Constantinople.
Right. But to see how that authority was challenged and really where the seeds for today's war were planted, we have to look at a specific event in the metropolis of Kyiv.
And this is way back in the year 1686.
Yes. 1686.
This is the historical loophole that blew my mind. Walk us through what actually happened in 1686.
So the Ecumenical Patriarch at the time, Dionysius IV, issued a synodal letter. And in this letter, he granted the Patriarch of Moscow the right to ordain the Metropolitan of Kyiv.
Okay.
Now, the text explicitly calls this an act of simony, which is a theological term for basically putting spiritual privileges up for sale to the highest bidder.
So Moscow paid for it?
Moscow paid
Yeah.
for this, right? Yes.
But even with money changing hands, there was a massive non-negotiable string attached to this deal, wasn't there?
There was. The condition was that the Metropolitan of Kiev still had to commemorate the Ecumenical Patriarch as his first hierarch during services.
Which might sound like just like a mere ritual to us today.
Right. But in the Orthodox world, commemoration is the ultimate proof of jurisdiction. It was a conditional delegation of a specific administrative duty, not a total transfer of ownership.
And Moscow just absorbed the territory and completely ignored the condition.
Over time, yeah. By 1722, Peter the Great formally reduced Kiev from a metropolis to just a mere diocese of the Patriarchate of Moscow.
Wow.
He appointed an archbishop instead of a metropolitan. He essentially just erased Kiev's historical status.
Wait, let me stop you there because the scale of this is hard to wrap my head around. Are we really saying that a massive chunk of this modern, bloody geopolitical conflict hinges on a conditional agreement from 1686 that was essentially broken immediately?
I mean, that is exactly the mechanism the author highlights. You can have a theological loophole sit quietly in the dark for 300 years.
Why didn't it blow up sooner, though?
Because of the massive geopolitical weight of the Russian Empire and then later the Soviet Union, it kept the status quo frozen in place. Basically, nobody had the power to challenge Moscow's absorption of Kiev.
Until the political earth shifted. Because you can't keep a historical grievance frozen forever if the borders on the map start moving.
Exactly.
And that earth moved violently in 2014.
The annexation of Crimea by Russia was the catalyst. It completely altered the dynamic on the ground.
Right.
Suddenly, the Ukrainian state leadership realized they had a massive vulnerability. They pushed intensely for a unified Orthodox Church in Ukraine that was entirely independent of the Patriarchate of Moscow.
Which makes perfect sense if you think about it purely from a national security perspective.
Totally.
If you are Ukraine fighting for your sovereignty, you cannot have your primary religious institution, which, by the way, influences millions of your citizens, answering directly to the capital of the country that just annexed your territory.
Exactly. The political pressure forcefully woke up this dormant jurisdictional issue. So, in June 2018, the Ukrainian parliament takes unprecedented action. They formally request autocephaly for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, directly from Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I.
This initiates just an incredibly rapid unraveling of the global church structure. The timeline in late 2018 is staggering. So on October 11th, the Ecumenical Patriarchate announces it will proceed with granting autocephaly to the Church of Ukraine.
And the blowback is immediate. Just 4 days later, on October 15, the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church reacts by completely severing communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate.
We need to pause and explain what severing communion actually does, because it sounds like, I don't know, a polite disagreement, but it's devastating.
It is the spiritual equivalent of a nuclear option. Severing communion means that the churches no longer recognize each other's sacraments.
Yeah.
So a Russian Orthodox believer traveling to Greece or Turkey suddenly cannot take communion, get married, or have a child baptized in a church aligned with Constantinople.
It literally severs the spiritual lifeline for millions of everyday people just to punish the leadership.
Yes. That October 15th decision is the official beginning of the Moscow-Constantinople schism.
But despite that schism, the process in Ukraine marches forward. On December 15th, a unification council formally establishes the Independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And then on January 5, 2019, Patriarch Bartholomew signs the Tomos, the official physical decree granting that independence.
Now look at how the Russian state reacted to this, because this proves it was never just a church squabble.
Yeah.
The text highlights that the Kremlin viewed this ecclesiastical decision as a direct blow to national security.
Which is wild.
The very day after the Ecumenical Patriarch announced the initial decision, Vladimir Putin convened an operational meeting with the permanent members of the Russian Security Council.
That is wild. The president of a nuclear superpower calls a Security Council meeting because a priest in Istanbul signed a piece of paper.
Well, Putin argued, according to the analysis cited in the text, that the primary goal of this autocephaly was to divide the people of Russia and Ukraine, to sow national and religious divisions.
So the Kremlin views the spiritual independence of Ukraine as an existential threat to Russian influence.
Exactly.
So the Kremlin sees this as a national security threat. But they can't just send in tanks to stop a church decree, at least, not yet. They have to fight this on theological grounds.
Right.
How do you legally stop an autocephaly? Moscow realizes they have to weaponize the church's own historical rule book, launching what the author calls a war of cannons.
Yes, and Moscow deploys 4 main arguments against the independence of the Ukrainian church. First, they argue that the ecumenical patriarchate simply does not have the exclusive authority to grant independence.
Okay, so challenging the authority directly.
Second, they dispute the entire understanding of what primacy means in the Orthodox world. They argue Constantinople is vastly overstepping its first among equals role.
So they're trying to strip the patriarchate of its historical coordinating power.
Exactly. Third, Moscow asserts that Ukraine is strictly the canonical territory of the Russian Orthodox Church.
Leaning on that 1686 absorption we discussed.
You got it. They claim Constantinople has absolutely no legal right to intervene. And fourth, they dispute the validity of the ordinations of the new Ukrainian hierarchy.
Okay.
They specifically point out that many leaders in the new church were ordained by a figure named Filaret, who Moscow had previously defrocked. Therefore, Moscow claims the new church is led by illegitimate clergy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Moscow drops this massive legal brief. How does Constantinople defend its actions? Because they reach all the way back to the year 451.
They do. They invoke the 9th canon of the 4th Ecumenical Council at Chalcedon.
Imagine pulling out a rule book from 451 AD to settle a 21st century geopolitical conflict. What does this canon actually say?
So this ancient canon specifically gives the throne of Constantinople the supreme right to judge appeals from bishops or clergymen who have disputes with their metropolitans anywhere in the world.
Anywhere.
Anywhere. Constantinople argues that the clergy in Ukraine appealed to them for protection from Moscow, and under this 5th century law, they had both the right and the duty to intervene and grant independence.
But Patriarch Bartholomew doesn't just hide behind ancient law, though.
Yeah.
As this war of words escalates into actual war in Ukraine, the text notes his defense becomes incredibly sharp. He emphasizes that challenging this autocephaly is what undermines inter-Orthodox peace.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is when Russian leaders started accusing him of causing the war through his decree, his response was scathing.
What did he say?
In April 2022, he stated it was outrageous to blame the violence on Ukraine's spiritual independence. He said, and I quote from the source, "They're looking for an alibi to justify the unjustifiable."
He just strips away the theological cover. He's basically saying, you wanted to invade and you're using my signature as an excuse. But a conflict of this magnitude couldn't be contained to Eastern Europe. If Moscow couldn't win the legal battle in Ukraine, they were going to attack Constantinople's allies globally.
Yeah.
And that takes us to an unprecedented, aggressive move in Africa.
Yeah, Moscow executed what the text describes as a canonical countermeasure. They created a Russian church exarchate in Africa. Now, historically, the entire continent of Africa falls under the jurisdiction of the ancient Patriarchate of Alexandria,
which had recognized the new Ukrainian church, angering Moscow. So how does Moscow retaliate? They don't just send angry letters. They launch an incursion.
The Church of Alexandria is historically venerable, but financially very poor. Moscow weaponized its massive resources, essentially offering financial support to African parishes that were willing to break away from Alexandria and join this new Russian structure.
Wow.
It was a strategy of aggressive, calculated fragmentation.
But the author contextualizes this as being about much more than just like petty revenge against Alexandria. This aligns with a massive ideological framework championed by Patriarch Kirill of Moscow.
Right, the vision of Moscow as the Third Rome. This is the ideological weight behind the expansion.
Third Rome, meaning what exactly?
The concept dictates that after the fall of the original Roman Empire, and then the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453, Moscow stands as the final true center of global Christianity.
It's ecclesiastical imperialism. They are expanding into Africa to project the image of Moscow as the singular global savior of traditional faith.
Yes.
This land grab was so severe it forced the Ecumenical Patriarchate to call an emergency synaxis, like a high-level gathering of the primates of all the ancient patriarchates, just to address the incursion.
And Patriarch Bartholomew openly accused Moscow of tarnishing the image of orthodoxy worldwide. But the global retaliation didn't stop at jurisdictional disputes. It morphed into modern information warfare, which brings us to the intelligence agencies.
Right. We're talking about the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR. According to the article, they launched a massive smear campaign against Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. They actively accused him of having direct ties to British intelligence services.
The SVR claimed that Bartholomew's goal, backed and funded by the British, was to cultivate Russophobia across Europe and ultimately displace the Russian Orthodox Church entirely.
Just a massive escalation.
They weaponized state media to paint him as a puppet of Western spy agencies.
The propaganda reached such an extreme that they literally labeled the Patriarch an Antichrist.
Which is heavy.
Yeah. When an intelligence agency starts using apocalyptic religious language to target a church leader, you know the boundaries between church and state have completely evaporated. And that escalation brings us right back to our opening hook.
The drone strike.
The text cites a recent report by the archons of the Ecumenical Patriarchate that connects this ecclesiastical crisis directly to events on the physical battlefield. It links that Russian drone attack in June 2026 on the Cathedral of the Dormition in Kyiv directly to this broader conflict.
The report argues that destroying this cathedral isn't just collateral damage in a chaotic war zone. It is a deliberate part of a broader strategy by the Russian state and its ecclesiastical leadership to violently overturn the traditional order.
Wow.
If you can't win the theological argument, you physically destroy the opposing church's infrastructure.
It is staggering. You have bishops arguing over 5th century decrees, while foreign intelligence agencies launch disinformation campaigns, and military drones strike cathedrals to settle the score. Which forces us to ask, how does this clash of titans actually affect the global network of everyday believers?
The text paints a picture of an orthodoxy in severe retreat, a chaotic global fracture. Because local churches all over the world are now being forced to pick sides, and there is no overarching Supreme Court to resolve the schism.
The author gives a prime example of this paralysis with Serbia, right?
Yes.
In the spring of 2021, the Serbian church elected a new patriarch, Porphyrios, and custom dictates he should have immediately visited the other primates, starting with the ecumenical patriarch in Constantinople.
But he broke that ancient custom. The Serbian church explicitly stated they consider the Moscow-aligned metropolitan to be the sole canonical head in Ukraine.
So they took a side.
Big time. To avoid signaling any support for Constantinople's actions, Patriarch Porphyrios simply avoided visiting any country that has an autocephalous church.
It completely froze diplomatic relations within the faith, and Moscow actively exploited this chaos to create internal schisms elsewhere. The text notes they successfully divided the national churches of Greece and Cyprus.
Yeah, they put out an open invitation to any dissenting clergy in those regions to jump ship and align with Moscow if they disagreed with their own leadership's recognition of the Ukrainian church.
And if you look inside Ukraine itself, the division on the ground is deep and bleeding. State authority has stepped in heavily to try and force a resolution. Like, in August 2024, President Zelensky signed a law explicitly banning organizations linked to the Russian Orthodox Church from operating in Ukraine.
But sweeping legislation doesn't magically erase centuries of deeply ingrained religious loyalty.
No.
The text points out that in August 2025, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the branch that historically belonged to the Moscow Patriarchate, was given a direct order by the state to sever all ties with Moscow.
And they refuse.
They refuse, which the author argues proves that their so-called Declaration of Independence back in 2022 was merely a pretext. It was a survival tactic to avoid state persecution during the war, rather than a genuine theological break from Patriarch Kirill.
However, we also have to recognize that this war has fractured the Russian church internally, too. It is not a monolith blindly following Putin. The source highlights a massive rebellion within the Russian Orthodox Church itself.
Yes. Over 400 priests of the Moscow-aligned Ukrainian Church formally appealed against what they explicitly called Patriarch Kirill's heresy regarding the war.
Wow.
They used the church's own internal mechanisms to accuse their leader of violating core Christian tenets.
And the physical exodus is real. More than 400 parishes have left that structure entirely since the invasion began. The text mentions the Special Council in May 2022, where they officially condemned the war as a direct violation of the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill."
Right.
They publicly distanced themselves from Patriarch Kirill's blessing of the military campaign.
It shows how deeply the moral crisis has penetrated the clergy. Everyday priests are risking their livelihoods and, potentially their freedom to oppose the weaponization of their faith.
So what does this all mean? We've covered centuries of complex history, covert intelligence operations, and deeply personal theological fractures. If you had to synthesize the core takeaway that Metropolitan Konstantinos is presenting to you, the listener, What is the ultimate tragedy here?
The ultimate tragedy is the severe devaluation of tradition through the political weaponization of faith. The text points directly to the leadership of the Russian Church. Patriarch Kirill is quoted as declaring that the Russian Orthodox Church preserves the national consciousness of both Russians and Ukrainians.
He is openly conflating ecclesiastical authority with national identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He transforms religious authority into a political weapon. According to the author, this stands in direct opposition to traditional Orthodox ecclesiology, which fundamentally rejects the idea of state-controlled national churches.
Right.
The church is supposed to be a universal body above the nation, not an instrument of the state's geopolitical ambitions.
And that's why this deep dive matters so much to you, regardless of your own religious background. This isn't just an esoteric debate about theology or how priests organize their hierarchies.
No, it is a profound, unfolding case study on what happens when ancient institutions designed to provide spiritual unity and moral guidance become hostages to modern geopolitical and nationalist interests.
Think about the other massive legacy institutions that govern our world today. The United Nations, international criminal courts, global financial agreements. Just like the Orthodox Church, these systems rely heavily on shared history, mutual trust, and a collective agreement to play by a specific set of rules.
And this conflict shows exactly how fragile that trust is. When a powerful actor decides they no longer want to play by those rules, and instead weaponizes the system's own loopholes against it.
Which leaves you with a lingering, unsettling question to mull over long after this deep dive ends. If sacred rules written in 451 AD can be so thoroughly hacked, reinterpreted, and weaponized by modern intelligence services to justify drone strikes today, what does that mean for the survival of any global institution we rely on right now?
Yeah.
If the foundational texts of a 2,000-year-old faith can be bent to serve a modern war, what hope do our secular, decades-old treaties have of holding the world together when the geopolitical earth shifts again?
It's a terrifying precedent for the stability of global order.
Something to think about as you look at the news today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you very much for your time. See you soon.